अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन, दिस इज़ सानी खान एंड यू वाचिंग न्यू एपिसोड ऑफ इनसाइड फाइनेंशियल मार्केट्स। नाज़रीन, गुज़िश्ता 6-7 महीने से बाज़ार में एक ही बात हो रही थी एंड दैट वाज कि दुनिया इधर की उधर हो जाए, बाज़ार ने 50,000 का लेवल क्रॉस करना है और इसमें बहुत सारे लोग बहुत सौ को क्रॉस कर गए। व्हाट वी सॉ इज़ दिस कि बाज़ार 48-49 के लेवल को दिखाती और फिर नीचे आ जाती और ऐसे में बहुत सारे लोग इस ख्याली में रहे कि बाज़ार लाजमी 50,000 पे जाएगी, होल्डिंग करनी चाहिए और आज बाज़ार जो है हमें 44,000 से भी नीचे नज़र आती है। सो एक चीज़ है जो कांस्टेंट है दैट आई कीप रिपीटिंग एंड आई शैल कीप रिपीटिंग, दैट इज़ लेवरेज। बाज़ार रहे ना रहे, लेवरेज और लेवरेज वाले ज़रूर रहेंगे और इन्वेस्टर की प्रोटेक्शन, क्या इन्वेस्टर भी इनफैक्ट रहे नहीं रहे इससे फ़र्क नहीं पड़ता, बिकॉज़ जब एक इन्वेस्टर 50 इन्वेस्टर जितना काम करके दिखा सकता है और उतना कमीशन उससे जनरेट हो सकता है एक्सचेंज के लिए भी, ब्रोकर के लिए भी, तो इस मॉडल को खैर बात कहने की कोई ख़ास ज़रूरत है नहीं। सो कमिंग बैक टू दी पॉइंट ऑफ न्यू लिस्टिंग, मैंने बताया कि 65 अरब 70 अरब रुपए राइट से रेज़ कर लिए, उसमें भी तेज़ी बंदी खेल के लोगों ने अपने 2 साल के राशन जमा कर लिए। देन कम्स द टॉपिक ऑफ द न्यू लिस्टिंग। 10 में से 7 के लिए वी नो कि उनकी लिस्टिंग किस तरह की थी, बट देयर आर 2 गुड IPOs which are doing well apart from others too. Airlink and Octopus, they are doing really great, but ये सब चीज़ें ड्रिल डाउन हो जाती हैं और मार्केट की रेगुलेटरी पर्सपेक्टिव में, मार्केट डेवलपमेंट के पर्सपेक्टिव में, एज टू व्हाट एक्सचेंज एंड रेगुलेटर इज़ डूइंग फॉर द डेवलपमेंट ऑफ द मार्केट, फॉर प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ द इन्वेस्टर्स इंटरेस्ट। सो इन दोनों साइड पे हमें लगता है कि जिन लोगों के लिए असल में खिदमत अंजाम दी जा रही हैं उनकी तसल्ली और तशफ़ी के लिए बहुत जायज़ और ठीक तरीके से काम जारी है। i.e. पाकिस्तान में नए इन्वेस्टर को इतने अच्छे तरीके से वेलकम नहीं किया जाता, रादर उसे टिका कर घूरा जाता है और जब तक वो मार्केट से चला नहीं जाए उस वक्त तक उसके साथ यही कुछ किया जाता रहता है जो आजकल हो रहा है, i.e. 500 पॉइंट की तेज़ी, 3,000 पॉइंट की मंदी। रेगुलेटर को कभी ये गवारा नहीं होता कि वो पूछ ले कि यार ये 500 रिपोर्ट्स आई थी पिछले 2 साल में, एक साथ ही एक ब्रोकर कह रहा था कि फ्रंटियर मार्केट से हम निकल जाएंगे और दूसरी तरफ उसी रिपोर्ट के बैक साइड पे वो लिख रहा है कि लकी जो है वो रिकॉर्ड ब्रेक कर देगा, 1360 का हो जाएगा। खैर ब्रोकर का तो ये हक बनता है, बट रेगुलेटर का भी आई थिंक ये हक बनता है कि वो आके अच्छे तरीके से बंद करके रखे। आज के प्रोग्राम में व्हाट वी वांट टू डिस्कस इज़ अ होलिस्टिक व्यू ऑफ द मार्केट। David White happens to be a very well known in our industry. पाकिस्तान की मार्केट डेवलपमेंट के लिए सन 2004 से बड़ी गिराकद खिदमत हैं इनकी। 2020 में भी पाकिस्तान में होके गए एंड ही डिड अ लॉट ऑफ फैंटास्टिक थिंग्स फॉर आवर मार्केट। यहाँ के लोग, यहाँ की मार्केट को किस तरह रीशेप करना है, कागज़ पे बहुत अच्छा लिखते हैं, बट फ्रस्ट्रेशन उनकी ये है कि उनके लिखे हुए को लोग देखना भी गवारा नहीं करते, ना इसको इम्प्लीमेंट करना चाहते हैं। इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के लिए भी रिपोर्ट्स लिखी जाती हैं क्योंकि इनफैक्ट नीयत नहीं होती है करने की, कागज़ का पेट ज़रूर फिल किया जाता है कि हाँ यार ये हम करना चाह रहे थे मगर नहीं कर सके। टाइम एंड अगेन मेरी उनसे बातचीत रहती है एंड ही इज़ बिन काइंड इनफ कि वो मुझे टाइम टू टाइम ईमेल पर और अदरवाइज़ भी गाइड करते रहते हैं और उनका हमेशा यही कहना है कि इंडिया और आप एक से तो हैं। इंडिया में तो कोई मसला नहीं हुआ, वहाँ पे गवर्नमेंट की विल थी, बदला भी बंद हुआ, बदला टाइप की प्रोडक्ट और उसके साथ जो मलहूज़ात होते हैं उनसे भी वहाँ की बाज़ार की जान छूट गई और आज दुनिया की बेस्ट मार्केट है। वहाँ के वॉल्यूम का कोई कंपैरिजन नहीं है, वहाँ का इन्वेस्टर बेस का कोई कंपैरिजन नहीं है, वहाँ के प्रोडक्ट बेस का कोई कंपैरिजन नहीं है। वहाँ पे वहाँ की गवर्नमेंट, वहाँ का रेगुलेटर सामने आके खड़ा हो गया कि भाई जो कर सकते हो कर लो, बदला इज़ नॉट ऑन। वहाँ का रेगुलेटर खड़ा हो गया कि फॉर द कंपटीशन सेक देयर हैज़ टू बी अनदर एक्सचेंज, और उन्होंने एक्सचेंज भी बना दिया, वहाँ पे डेरिवेटिव्स को भी लिस्ट कर दिया और वहाँ पे वॉल्यूम्स भी करके दिखा दिए। सो पाकिस्तान में चीज़ें आई थिंक आज़ाद होने में अभी वक्त है, डेविड वाइट से डिस्कस करते हैं कि आज उनकी सोच और फ़िक्र का लेवल क्या है। मायूसी तो अच्छा लफ्ज़ नहीं है, बिकॉज़ ही इज़ अ कंसल्टेंट, और वो कभी भी मायूस नहीं होंगे, बिकॉज़ हमें पता है कि कंसल्टेंट अगर मायूस हो जाए तो उसका बिज़नेस भी उससे नाराज़ हो जाता है। सो डियर डेविड, वेलकम टू द शो, and I would want to have a few questions starting from the market development. I would want you to kindly share your views about our market as to what you have done for our market, and going forward, what is your view regarding our market?
Right. Well, I've been involved in the Pakistan market since about 2004, doing various roles for donor agencies like Asian Development Bank, etc., and working with the SCCP and the exchanges. Originally, of course, there were the Islamabad, Lahore and Karachi exchange, and that has now moved to the Pakistan Stock Exchange. And over those years, I've done a number of special projects as well. One of them was to be an advisor to the committee that looked at the market crash, the Badla crash that occurred in around 2006, 2007. So I've been involved for quite a number of years with Pakistan. My last visit was in 2019, 2020 to undertake a project to look at a capital markets development plan. Well, actually, it was a financial markets development plan, which looked at both the debt and the equity market, and came up with an outline of a plan, which I understand has now been taken forward further by ADB, and they have a team that is looking at the implementation of that plan. The idea of that plan was to look at things like how do you develop the demand for equities and debt in Pakistan? How do you foster supply of issues? How do you build capacity? How do you develop risk management tools? How do you consolidate the market infrastructures that you have now that you have demutualized? And what amendments you need to make to your legal and regulatory framework, as well as your tax framework, to encourage investors and particularly attract international investors to your market. So it's been a long haul for moving from the individual exchanges to the consolidated demutualized exchange. Unlike other markets, you haven't moved as yet to develop an IPO for the exchange and to actually list the exchange itself. It's probably too soon for that at this stage, but I think you need to start to think early about those issues. And if we look at comparative markets such as India, where they have been on a journey now for some time, and I think SEBI, if it hasn't announced, it's about to announce the approval of the listing of the National Stock Exchange as an IPO, and they have developed their market tremendously over the past 15 years. And if you compare that to Pakistan, unfortunately, Pakistan has lagged behind on a number of issues that they have addressed, and they addressed them quite forcibly and clearly to make sure that they developed a market which not only appealed to retail investors and local investors, but to the international market as well. So I think there's some good things that have happened over the years, but there's more that can be done, particularly to address those issues. Unfortunately, recently, MSCI has downgraded the categorization of the market from emerging to frontier, which now you'll have to earn back that process. And I think within the plan that we laid out in 2019, 2020, there were lots of issues to address some of the micro issues of the market structure. But the bigger issues, I think, were in the development of the market infrastructure, particularly in relation to the development of derivatives. And I've never felt that Pakistan has really moved forward from the days of Badla. We've had a number of different iterations of derivatives, but they haven't really captured the way that India captured moving forward to a proper futures market with a proper CCP and risk management tools to develop the market. So that's sort of some initial feelings, if you like, about the market as I see it.
Okay, great. So the basic understanding that I've understood and grasped from your point of view, or rather explanation, is this, that market development and especially the participation of the investor is the issue, and the reason behind that is probably the product, and the product which relates to the leverage. India has gotten rid of the Badla market some 20 years ago, and now they are on the futures, world-class, world-standard derivatives. And in Pakistan, the introduction of options is an issue because the lobby which holds the market doesn't want this leverage product to be introduced, this option product or derivative to be introduced, because the new form of the Badla, which nowadays is available in the name of margin trading system, is actually having at least 40 to 45 billion rupees open position to be settled. And all these positions are held by the financier, and they are not more, they are just 4 to 5 financiers. And because in the Badla or the MTS market, you would see the financing rate hovering to 20 to 25, and at times it is more than 30%. And in the 2008 crisis, in some stocks, it went more than 40%. So this is a product which gives the neck of the leverage taker into the hands of financier. What is it that Pakistan is unable to do and India did it, and what is it that you kept advising and it somehow didn't happen?
Right. Well, I think it's not an easy question to answer, or a simple process to sort of flick a switch and to go from what you have to what you need to have. And I think the first thing that, if you may remember, in India's case, was that the government, in a way, made a decision to set up the new national stock exchange to compete with the other exchanges, and they drove the development of the single stock futures as a methodology. Now, how you actually approach this is you need to get your foundations right. So you need to get all those issues that there are in relation to. Let me think of some issues that you have. For example, you have lots of stocks that don't have enough free float. You have lots of stocks that you want to put up onto a second board or what have you, but there is not enough liquidity to actually get these markets running properly. So there's a lot of micro issues in the design of the markets that need to be addressed. And then overlying that, once you do get liquidity, then the way that India went about it, they started to fix those micro issues of the market, started to get some liquidity, develop their single stock futures, and over time, and it's taken time, they've had enormous increases in the range of futures and options and the volumes. I mean, it took them maybe 10 years to get to 50,000 contracts. This last year, they've done over 6 billion contracts. So it takes time, and you can't achieve it overnight. You have to fix not only the micro issues of the market, developing those issues which make you attract liquidity and have liquidity, and then you need to address the infrastructure so that you have the proper risk management tools in place. And all those things take time, and they take commitment, and they take money. You have, in the last number of years, you've attracted the Shenzhen exchange to get involved. They have good technology. I understand that technology is being introduced. But you need to address some of these fundamental issues of developing the quality of the market quality indicators, and then developing the infrastructure around that process so that you consolidate your market infrastructure. If you look at other exchanges that have been successful, one of the things that they've done is they have what they call a vertically integrated market. So they will have a exchange holding company, and that holding company will own the clearing company, the CCP, the exchange, the technology infrastructure company. You'll have a single technology company across all those different subsidiaries of the exchange. Right. And they build an integrated vertical market from the retail investor through to the clearing, the settlement, the futures, and the options trading, etc. So that you build a company which has got all those activities together. Now, one of your issues is it's a function of time and what has happened in the past. These are basically individual entities run by individual organisations, boards of directors, etc. So it's very hard to integrate everything together in Pakistan. One of the recommendations of our report back in 2020 was to go to the stage of even what some other markets have done and employ like a investment banker or an investment house, maybe somebody outside the country, not inside the country, to actually look at that infrastructure process and lay down a plan how it could all be brought together, and you could actually develop the infrastructure and develop the way you need to develop the market. Understood. I think at the moment it's disparate units, it's silos which can't really work with each other to the extent that's necessary to drive the changes that have to happen.
Okay. Mr. David, it's time for a short break. नाज़रीन, वक्त हुआ चाहता है एक छोटे से वक्फे का. डेविड के साथ बातचीत का सिलसिला यहीं से शुरू करेंगे आफ्टर अ शॉर्ट ब्रेक. वेलकम बैक नाज़रीन. प्रोग्राम के पहले सेगमेंट में डेविड से तफसीली गुफ्तगू हुई और डेविड ने काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें पॉइंट आउट की. इन्होंने बताया कि 2020 में पाकिस्तान में इन्होंने विज़िट किया और पाकिस्तान का जो कैपिटल मार्केट डेवलपमेंट प्लान है उसके ऊपर भी इन्होंने रिकमेंडेशंस दी. एक रिकमेंडेशन ये थी कि बाहर जाके दुनिया को देखें. एक्चुअली देयर आर टू टाइप ऑफ इश्यूज़. एक तो हैं माइक्रो लेवल के इश्यूज़ हैं और एक हैं होलिस्टिकली बड़े लेवल के इश्यूज़. इन दोनों इश्यूज़ के ऊपर ही सेड देयर इज़ अ प्लान एंड देयर हैज़ टू बी अ विल एंड डेडिकेशन. ये सबसे इम्पॉर्टेंट चीज़ हैं जो कि उन्होंने पॉइंट आउट की. और वही समझते हैं कि हिंदुस्तान में इंडिया के केस में तो एक परफेक्ट विल और डेडिकेशन नज़र आती है. उन्होंने नेशनल स्टॉक एक्सचेंज जो है वो इस्टेब्लिश किया और अपने इंटरप्राइजेस को वहाँ लिस्ट भी किया और कंपटीशन की वजह से वहाँ की मार्केट में बेहतरी आ गई. वहाँ पर जो बदला है वो आज से 15 साल पहले ख़त्म हो गया और वहाँ के जो फीचर्स हैं सिंगल स्टॉक फीचर्स जो हैं उन्होंने बहुत ही इफ़ेक्टिवली ग्रिप किया और ट्रिलियंस में वहाँ पर जो है वो काम होना शुरू हो गया. लोग पहले मजाक उड़ाते थे कि 1 बिलियन, अब 1 बिलियन की जो ट्रेडिंग है वो हिंदुस्तान के केस में मजाक हो गया. सो जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की बात अगर करें तो 120 ऑफिसेज़ हैं डिपॉजिटरी कंपनी के इंडिया में. पाकिस्तान में लेस दैन 3. So पाकिस्तान में अगर आप penetration देखें of the market, of the individuals, of the broker, of the participants, तो वो ना होने के बराबर है. So दोबारा डेविड से बातचीत का सिलसिला शुरू करते हैं और इनसे समझते हैं कि what else he has to say. So dear David, you were just saying that there were a number of issues, but holistically there are some micro level issues and there are some infrastructure level issues. So in terms of infrastructure, there can be plans, and for Pakistan it has been seen for quite numerous occasions that reports keep on coming and they are good to be shelved and no action takes place on the report. But when we look at the Indian market, you would note a number of reports which came from Gupta to a number of other reports. All those reports have now been implemented. In terms of derivatives as well, we saw that Badla is now out, and because of standard future contracts, their market happens to be a real and genuine market. So my question to you is that if you just write a report and you give it to government officials, I can say on my own that nothing is going to happen. But one thing that we discussed with the members of the policy board as well, and that was, if you open up the competition, if you create an infrastructure which gives some space to the competition, that will be the real and genuine service to the Pakistani capital market, because in Pakistani capital market there is a system of strong lobbies, and there is a system when very few people have grip on whole the sector of the economy or the segment of the economies. So in terms of the capital market, what is your suggestion that how could this market be freed from some people who actually hold the market? And our view is that competition, rather restoring the competition, is the only way forward.
Right. Well, yes. Well, you also have to remember that it's only a number of years that you've actually been demutualized. So you brought the three exchanges together. You've brought in a strategic investor in Shenzhen. It's working to get its technology in place, etc. So as I said before, you can't sort of leapfrog these things too fast. You have to sort of build on getting the basics right and then building up to the process. So it's a hard slog. Markets are not easy to correct over time, in the sense of you have an established broker network, you've had your established small brokers in Pakistan, so it's very difficult to immediately sort of think, well, okay, we're going to have a different market and we're going to do it differently than we have in the past. You have to take people with you, you have to take the investors with you, and you have to take your financial market with you. You have to educate your investors, you have to build capacity. I mean, a lot of the brokers wouldn't understand about the risk management. They can understand the short-term MTS type trading, but they might not be able to understand the complicated derivatives process. So they need to be educated, and you need to have capacity building so that the market can address these products. So it's not something you can do without proper attention to. Now, in other markets, one of the things that they have done is they have freed the management of the exchanges to make the decisions from the brokers and the owners. So, for example, when Hong Kong Exchange or Singapore Exchange or the Australian Exchange first demutualized, and then they had lots of the brokers were still shareholders in that market. But over time, it's the institutions that have become the shareholders, and the brokers no longer are the owners of the exchange. The brokers are participants, and anybody can become a participant. So a feature of a lot of the other exchanges was that anybody could become a broker that met the capacity and the financial resources necessary and had the right staff and right systems in place, could become a broker. So if you have a look at a lot of the other markets, there are a lot of brokers that have entered into the marketplace, professionals that have entered in and have provided that competition that you're talking about. So the competition doesn't have to be another exchange or another infrastructure vehicle. It can actually be the brokers themselves. So you have to sort of look at these issues to make sure that you're encouraging that competition to occur.
Okay, great. So if you were to rate that which issue tops or which issue is more critical for the development of the market, A, broker education, B, the infrastructure, which would you rate first?
Well, I think you have to address them fairly concurrently. So one of the features of the plan that we had was that you needed to have a multi-function addressing of these issues. You just couldn't fix the micro issues without thinking about the infrastructure. You couldn't fix the infrastructure and develop new products without thinking about the capacity and developing of the risk management tools, etc., or fixing the regulatory framework that you have in place. You know, some of the SECP rules, etc. So it's not you can put one over the other. They're all important, but I think that that it needs to have certainly a market approach. And that's one of the other things that usually the market has been driven either by the exchange or the SECP working with the exchange and the clearing company or what have you. It needs a multi-approach. It needs the market as a whole to embrace some of the reforms that are necessary. So it's not that easy. I think the exchange tries to do that. I think the SECP tries to do that. But it really needs everybody. It's like rowing a boat. You know, everybody's got to be pulling the oars at the right stage to get movement going forward.
Okay, great. So I would once again like to get your view over the brokers' education and the qualified staff providing services to the investors. So there are a number of ICM or Institute of Financial Market requirements which we see kept on the deadline being extended again and again. So do you think that an informed, rather qualified trader and the CEO of the TREC holder, that is the new name for the member of the stock exchange, would it matter if we enforce that thing first, that nothing is going to happen unless all brokerage houses CEO happen to be qualified and all the traders do have due certifications from IFMP?
Right. So if I can give you an example of a way this has been approached in other markets. For example, in Hong Kong, they set up the Hong Kong Securities Institute at around the same time, about 1998 and 2000, around the time that they demutualized the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And they introduced, through that Securities Institute, courses that had to be completed before you could be licensed as an advisor or as an operator by the Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission, which is the same body as the SECP. So there, what they did was, with the existing brokers that had been in the market for some time, they grandfathered them in, but over the last 15 years, a lot of those people have now left the market, and the new people have been educated and brought in over time, and that then creates a new approach to markets from the old. So it's not like you can say everybody, look, it's very difficult to teach a dog new tricks, an old dog new tricks. So you have to have a sort of compromise between embracing your existing brokers into the system, but ensuring that new people that work in the industry and new entrants are getting that education. And I think what has happened over time in Pakistan is that the new people coming in have learnt the old dog's tricks, so they haven't built that capacity. So, you know, you're most probably 10 years behind where other markets have started up this education process and enforced the education process for new entrants coming into the industry.
Okay, David, I have to take a short break here and we'll resume the discussion from the same point after the break. नाज़रीन, वक्त हुआ चाहता है एक छोटे से वक्फे का, वक्फे के बाद बातचीत का सिलसिला हम यहीं से शुरू करेंगे. वेलकम बैक नाज़रीन. नाज़रीन, प्रोग्राम के दूसरे सेगमेंट में डेविड ने बड़ा ओपनली कहा कि जो कंपटीशन है दैट डजंट ओनली मीन दैट यू गॉट टू हैव न्यू एक्सचेंजेस, लेकिन ब्रोकर के दरमियान भी अगर आप कंपटीशन को रिस्टोर कर दें, एक कंपटीशन की फ़ज़ा को क्रिएट कर दें, तो उससे भी मार्केट कैन इम्प्रूव, चीज़ें बेहतर हो सकती हैं, लोगों का, इन्वेस्टर का जो कॉन्फिडेंस है वो रिस्टोर हो सकता है अगर ये जो ब्रोकर लेग है इसमें कंपटीशन आ जाए, इसमें एजुकेशन आ जाए, इसमें सर्टिफिकेशन हो जाए. और उन्होंने एक एग्जांपल भी दी हांगकॉन्ग की कि जहाँ पे ग्रैंडफादरिंग जो है वो की गई और उसकी वजह से जो है वो 10 से 20 सालों के अंदर एक टोटली क्वालिफाइड न्यू जनरेशन वाज इन द मार्केट प्लेस एंड मार्केट वाज परफॉर्मिंग सुपर्ब. बट व्हेन वी लुक एट इंडिया में ये सारे काम हो गए. इंडिया के अंदर बदला भी से भी जान छूट गई, बदला ख़त्म हो गया. इंडिया के अंदर पुराने ब्रोकर्स भी हैं और नए क्वालिफाइड लोग भी हैं. इंडिया के वॉल्यूम्स जो हैं वो हमसे कई सौ हज़ार गुना बेहतर हैं. वहाँ की मार्केट में जो पार्टिसिपेशन है वो 2.5 करोड़ लोग पार्टिसिपेट करते हैं, हमारे यहाँ 2.5 लाख भी नहीं है. सो व्हेन यू कंपेयर विथ इंडिया हम काफ़ी पीछे रह गए हैं. और इवन जो दूसरी मार्केट हैं वो कभी हमारे बराबर होती थी रेगुलेटरी पर्सपेक्टिव से, वो भी हमें काफ़ी पीछे छोड़ गई हैं. सो इस आखिरी सेगमेंट में, लास्ट सेगमेंट में हम बातचीत करेंगे डेविड वाइट से इन्वेस्टर कॉन्फिडेंस रिस्टोर करने के लिए उनके क्या सोच हैं, क्या प्रपोजल है. और ये जो रोड मैप की वो बार बार बात करते हैं, 2020 में उन्होंने पाकिस्तान विज़िट भी किया. सो हम इनसे पूछेंगे कि व्हाट डज ही थिंक्स अबाउट द फ्यूचर प्रॉस्पेक्ट्स ऑफ द मार्केट. और सबसे इम्पॉर्टेंट बात ये कि जो स्टॉक एक्सचेंजेस अगर नहीं बनना पॉसिबल है पाकिस्तान के इस माहौल और सिस्टम में, तो ये जो मिथ है कि प्रोडक्ट सेंट्रिक हो गए हैं और शॉर्ट टर्म प्रोडक्ट में ही लोग अपना फ्यूचर देख रहे हैं, इसको लॉन्ग टर्म पर्सपेक्टिव में कैसे चेंज किया जा सकता है, ये बातचीत हम करेंगे डेविड वाइट से. डियर डेविड, वी वुड वांट यू to kindly comment on what can be done at its best to actually restore the investor confidence, because when you look at the market, when you look at the participation, what keeps on happening is that every other year you hear that 100,000 accounts have been closed, and then for a few months you would see the least participation, and then after a few months when there is some activity, rather index is moving up, then you see some new blood coming to the market, and again after a few months there is yet another crisis, and then people lose their money and they go out of the market and they never come back to the market. So the number of people who lose and leave the market is always higher than the people who are presently staying into the market. So investor confidence is a great issue when you talk about our market. What can be done to restore, rather develop the investor confidence?
Right. Well, we talked about some of those micro issues. For example, market surveillance. The coordination and the way that the markets are surveyed between the infrastructure organisations, between the SECP, the stock exchange, what happens in the mercantile exchange. You need to have a consolidated surveillance process, and you need to have enforcement actions that flow through from that. So it's one of those issues which will help build that investor confidence. Having, for example, having got the emerging market status on MSCI, it's another issue that builds confidence because you're part of international indexes. Losing that and going back to frontier status is a shame because you need to now rebuild that again. So you need to fix some of these underlying micro issues. You know, what's the point of having stocks that haven't got enough free float? And because they haven't got enough free float, they're easy to be manipulated. You need to enforce what are the listing rules and what are the requirements for stocks to be listed. So you won't endear yourself to investors if you have a market which isn't fair and is not properly surveyed and regulated. So I think it's addressing those issues that is going to give you long-term confidence in your investors.
Okay, great. So, just few moments back, you were talking about India, and I would like to quote what you said. They actually progressed well when it comes to eradicating badla, introducing futures. We and them happen to be the same market, same people, same language, same culture. What is it that they were able to get rid of what I call the evil for the market, the badla? They have got better participation, 100 times better market capitalization, more participation. What is it that they were able to do it and we couldn't do it? In your view, what's the reason?
Well, I think you mentioned a number of the reports that they had and a number of the industry committees that they had when they set this up. So obviously it was a big shock to the existing exchanges when the government decided that they were going to encourage the National Stock Exchange and to get it going. Once it encouraged it, the National Stock Exchange worked closely with the government and with the central bank on the development of, you know, how to introduce regulatory changes and how to introduce derivatives. For example, in the early days when they had the report, I think you mentioned it was the Gupta report, I think it was one of the original ones. When they had that report, the banks were first allowed to do derivatives. So they had changes in the banking system for over-the-counter derivatives before they worked on or they allowed the exchange-traded derivatives. And they got the banks to understand it first, and then they introduced it into the equity market after that. But they made a very hard and fast decision that badla was to be taken away, and they then worked over time through their committees and through their the National Stock Exchange to develop the proper CCPs and clearing mechanisms and trading mechanisms to introduce the new products.
Okay, great. So they were able to do it because of the government's commitment and because the Indian government established the National Stock Exchange. And a seasoned broker said to me this, that in Pakistan this cannot happen because the brokers has the bigger capacity which the Indian brokers enjoyed in India. He was of the view that in Pakistan too, if a national stock exchange is being set up by the government, and if the government says that we would delist our national state enterprises from the existing exchange and we'll take it to the national stock exchange, and there we would start derivatives, and we won't have such leverage products which have kept the stock market hostage for last 70 years. He thought that that's the only way if the government comes forward, and unless until there is a government will, there can't be a market, there can't be a place which could be stated as a market. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't think you need to go to that down that route. I think you have now got a demutualized exchange. You need the demutualized exchange, and the government needs to work together to work out how it can put in the right infrastructure. And I really would love to see the government take forward one of the recommendations we had for consolidating the capital market infrastructures and putting in a more integrated vertical exchange into Pakistan, so that you can develop the products, develop the market. I don't think you need to cut aside the existing Pakistan Stock Exchange. It is demutualized now. It needs to address these issues together with the SCCP and the government, and I think that is possible. I don't think you need to create a whole new process to do it.
Okay, great. So in the last, David, if you would want to give a message to our regulator, to our bosses, our platform is available.
I think my message would be that there is now a project to implement the plan that was put forward in early 2020. I think that I would hope that all segments of the market, the regulators, the exchanges, the investment managers, etc., would look to see how they can develop their capacity, develop the infrastructure, and put in a better process so that you have the opportunity to take the market forward. I wouldn't like to see all sort of the efforts that have been made over the last 15 years to be all thrown aside and try to start a new process. I think the basics are there. It just needs some attention and tweaking to put in the right processes, and you can develop your market. Other markets have done it, and they've gone from strength to strength.
Okay, great. Dear David, thank you very much for taking out time and talking to our audience. Thank you very much. Bye bye. नाज़रीन, आज के प्रोग्राम में डेविड वाइट जो हैं वो हमारे साथ शरीक गुफ्तगू रहे, और डेविड वाइट ने बहुत ही खुल के ओपनली ये चीज़ें हमारे साथ शेयर की कि पाकिस्तान की बाज़ार के साथ एक्चुअली असल में होता क्या रहा है। 2004 से 2020 तक पाकिस्तान के लिए ही केप्ट ऑन एडवाइजिंग टू द रेगुलेटर्स। पाकिस्तान में एक चीज़ बहुत अच्छी होती है कि स्पायरल बाइंडिंग के साथ दस्तावेज़ात लिखी जाती हैं, प्लान ए बी सी, प्लान एक्स वाई जेड 9 सब कहा जाता है, बगैर इम्प्लीमेंटेशन नहीं होती। 2020 में उन्होंने कहा कि इम्प्लीमेंटेशन प्लान जो है कैपिटल मार्केट का वो बना है, और उसमें उन्होंने काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें ऐसी बताई हैं, ऐसी कही हैं कि जो अगर कर दी जाएं तो वो समझते हैं कि मार्केट के काफ़ी सारे मसाइल हल हो सकते हैं, पार्टिसिपेशन बढ़ सकती है, इन्वेस्टर का कॉन्फिडेंस रिस्टोर हो सकता है। उन्होंने ये भी पॉइंट आउट किया कि मार्केट के माइक्रो इश्यूज़ हैं, इन्वेस्टर कॉन्फिडेंस इज़ ऑन द टॉप, और इन्फोर्समेंट के अलावा उन्होंने कहा कि सर्विलेंस इज़ समथिंग कि उसके ऊपर अगर थोड़ी सी भी दिल जमी से मेहनत कर ली जाए। बहुत सारी रिपोर्ट्स के लिए खालिद मिर्ज़ा ने भी कहा, ये भी इन्होंने भी यही बात कही, और किसी भी पढ़े लिखे से बात करें तो वो यही कहेगा کہ کافی ساری رپورٹس شیلف میں پڑی ہیں، کسی ایک رپورٹ کو نکال کر اس کے اوپر ایکشن لے لیں، کسی ایک آدھ بروکر کو یا جو بھی ہے اس کو ذرا بتا دیں کہ قانون کے حساب سے آپ کی یہ صحیح جگہ بنتی ہے، بازار میں بہتری آ جائے گی. بٹ اگین آپ جانتے ہیں کہ میں نے کیا کہنا ہے. سو امید ہی کی جا سکتی ہے. بٹ آخری چیز جو انہوں نے بہت ہی پریشان کن کہی، رادر انہوں نے طنز کیا، انہوں نے کہا کہ اٹس اے شیم آن آور مارکیٹ دیٹ وی آر بینگ ڈیگریڈڈ. ناظرین اجازت دیجیے، اللہ حافظ.